Alright, everyone, I'm here in a location that is not my usual location. That's because I'm on vacation and don't really need to explain why. I'm just here to do what I usually do and then talk about movies, so you read the title. You already know what's going on, so let's go. This was, to say the very least, a hell of a way to start part 3 of this challenge. In fact, that's part of why this video took so long. I was genuinely intimidated by this film and put off seeing it for a while. I tend to love films that exist in an altered reality because this leads to incredibly interesting sequences in this film. The atmosphere in this film is incredibly palpable. The use of shadows being brought out by the beautiful cinematography always leaves something in the visuals to chew on. There's beautiful framing and fantastic sets. I loved some of the fluid camera movements that the film utilizes. I absolutely adored the use of orchestral pieces too, and that added to the atmosphere. How the atmosphere is set up in the film made the payoff incredibly satisfying. The scene with all the women towards the end was especially hard-hitting. The performance by Marcello Mastroianni was amazing, and I honestly found myself relating to him at points. This film explores egotism and writer's block incredibly well. I loved how meta the film got too. This is a bit of a double-edged sword though, because the film felt a little full of itself in more than a few moments. But I guess that's the point. I don't know, it just bothered me sometimes. Even the director himself names this movie as one of his favorite films of all time. It's clear to me that the film had more than a few moments of being self-indulgent. It's not like this ruined the film or anything, I still loved it regardless. I actually think it works better for me if I look at it as an egotistical piece. I don't have much else to say about this film at the end of the day because I believe it needs a rewatch before I could fully put together my thoughts. It is certainly important and I can see its inspiration in many other films. This is a great film and I'm excited to see it again. This rating is pretty loose, but for now, 8 out of 10. Romance films are difficult for me to get into, mainly because they tend to be incredibly cliched. Luckily, James Ivory created something that feels like a genuine portrayal of real love. The biggest strength of this film is the character development. They feel like real people and they go through well-defined arcs. There's a clear evolution, they have ups and downs, they have their own strengths and weaknesses. The performances by James Wilby and Hugh Grant were fantastic in the way that they have their own distinct personalities. They aren't carbon copies of each other unlike in many other romance films. The character writing is genuinely pretty fantastic. This film also had some great visuals. The production design and costumes are professional and feel accurate to the timeline. One gripe I have is with how perfect the teeth are, but these characters are meant to be prestigious, so it doesn't bother me too much. This film is definitely well shot and the music was good, but neither were exceptional. The cinematography's strength lies in the camera placement and the framing. There's also quite a few scenes where the camera lingers, which really allows the actors to realistically pace their emotions, which is important in a romance film. I really don't have any huge issues with this film. There is some overacting here and there that felt unintentionally funny. The transfer from the first act into the second act felt kinda messy, which led to me feeling completely uninvested for a solid 15 to 20 minutes. I wasn't bored, but there was a disconnect. The final hour was actually pretty fantastic and it really stuck the landing. I still had a lot of love for this film and I would definitely watch it again. And if the entire movie were more like the final hour, I'd probably be giving it an 8 out of 10, but who knows? Maybe a rewatch will resolve my pacing issues. Going with a strong 7. This is the second Powell and Pressburger film that I've seen, the first being Black Narcissus, which I reviewed in part 1. So after seeing that film, I was incredibly excited to check this out, which many people consider to be their masterpiece. I love how immaculate their films are in terms of their craft. The Powell and Pressburger formula creates some truly beautiful visuals. The film almost looks like a gorgeous painting, down to some of the backgrounds clearly being paintings. All the performances are great, with Anton Walbrook absolutely stealing the show. His character was such a schemer and very manipulative, and the performance made his character so watchable, which was also brought out by his incredible incredibly sharp tongue. There are quite a few conversations he was having with other people that felt like a meticulously choreographed fencing match. The best parts of the film by far were the ballet scenes. Without a single line of dialogue, these scenes contain a ton of interesting symbolism. There's also a cornucopia of excellent cinematography, music, and colors. The lighting during these scenes is especially fantastic. These scenes felt so dreamlike and they were beautifully expressive. As much as I love this film, there is something that kind of drags the film down a peg for me. And I say this knowing that it's more of a personal gripe rather than an objective flaw. The first 40 minutes or so of this film didn't engage me as much as the rest of the film did. Everything after and including the first ballet performance was so great that it made the first 40 minutes feel less investing. I also felt that a certain obvious painted background was a little distracting. I still believe this film is incredibly impressive, but I honestly prefer Black Narcissus, which I know is kind of blasphemy to some people. I know that a lot of people won't agree with me, but in my eyes, that film felt a little more polished. I still love them both very much, and as for the Red Shoes, 8 out of 10. This film kind of felt like a companion piece to The Killing, which came out around the same time and was also a heist film that other heist films take inspiration from. As similar as they are, I honestly prefer The Killing. The first act of this film felt a little bit lacking. I was interested but not truly invested. And then the real heist began, and I was captivated. My eyes were glued to the screen the entire time. It was incredible. This scene barely had any dialogue with no music. It was all atmosphere and I loved the shit out of it. The two main characters are well performed and interesting, but I never fell in love with any of them. There were a couple of lines here and there that felt weird. The best performance of the film was easily Jean Servet as Tony Le Stéphanois. I liked the character of Joe too, even if he kind of felt like a secondary interest compared to Jean Servet. Aside from those two, I was never truly invested in any of the characters. When some characters died, I didn't feel the impact all that much, aside from a couple of specific moments. This film's strong suit isn't in the characters, it's more in the atmosphere and story. Both of those aspects are genuinely fantastic in this film, and it really kept me invested. It isn't some avant-garde masterpiece in my eyes, but it's an incredibly entertaining thriller with two good main characters. There's clever editing, a well-written story, and a fantastic sense of atmosphere. There isn't really much else to say except that if you haven't seen this or The Killing, then you should check them out. Giving out a 7. God, these ratings are boring so far. Alright, here we are, my first Charlie Chaplin film, and I was absolutely floored. This film is a genuinely brilliant satire, a genius comedy, and a wonderful timeless classic. Charlie Chaplin created this film as a way to criticize and condemn the actions and political standing of Adolf Hitler in the late 30s and early 40s. It was even made before America's entry into World War II. I love his talent for physical comedy, but at the same time, he was an intelligent man who had profound things to say. Even with this film's message, the film is still a genuinely hilarious comedy. Chaplin's energy is so electric and bombastic, he's so incredibly expressive and full of contagious energy. Everything about this film feels so incredibly coordinated and precise. Chaplin's body language is also genuinely fantastic. He plays two characters in the film, and he plays them both in a way where they feel like separate performances. Sometimes all you have to do is look at the way he moves and you know which character he's playing. This film is also structured in a pretty interesting way. There's a clear overarching story, but it kind of feels like it's tied together by random vignettes with reoccurring characters. I honestly love this because each little section utilized a different avenue of comedy. Some focused on wordplay, others on slapstick. One in particular involving a coin was pretty fantastic. There's also a ton of subtle background jokes that will add a lot to repeated viewings. Now that I've gone on about the comedy, I want to touch on the incredibly effective emotional moments. I love the characters and connected to the arcs they went through. The emotional moments don't take away from the pacing and they all have their place. The ending especially is literally perfect. Chaplin delivers one of the most effective and emotionally moving monologues I have ever seen or heard in my entire life. The way the camera rarely cuts, Chaplin's captivating voice and his excellent performance, and the fact that he barely even fucking blinks makes it one of the best endings I have seen in a long time. I am so happy I picked this as my first Charlie Chaplin film. Now that I've seen it, I would probably call it one of my top 5 favorite satires. Special shout out to my friends Jacob and Finkel for throwing this out as a recommendation. Everyone should watch this timeless classic. Get that 9 on the board. The movie deserves it. Can we get a round of applause? Yeah, that's. What the fuck am I doing? I've always been pretty interested in monster cinema. I like the thought of being able to sit back, relax, and watch a giant monster destroy a city of nameless, faceless people. So this film is definitely a must-watch from day one of my pilgrimage into foreign and indie cinema. I don't think it surprises anyone that my favorite parts of this film were when Godzilla was being destructive. The use of miniatures really sold the scale of Godzilla, and having him played by a man in a suit really added to the personality of the character. Even though I enjoyed Godzilla, the other characters are where this film really drags. Aside from the zoologist, played by the consistently amazing Takashi Shimura, everyone else is kinda lame. Nothing against the performances, it's just that the writing doesn't really make them that interesting, which honestly made the tension during the scenes where they were in danger almost non-existent. I do appreciate that the film attempted to deliver a genuine message about the effect the atomic bomb had on Japan. It doesn't really go beyond the surface, but it is genuinely effective. As much as I enjoyed the film, it is a little clunky, even in moments of action. It doesn't feel as smooth or as consistent in pacing as the 1933 King Kong film, which I would consider to be much better than this. Yeah, the dialogue may not be as PC or realistic, but it's at least memorable. This film doesn't have any moments of dialogue that I really remember. I am glad that I finally checked this out, and even though I have my issues with it, I could probably see it again. I watched this with my girlfriend and she enjoyed it quite a lot. I would love to watch the supplements on the Criterion Blu-ray, but until then, I think I'll go with a strong 6. Get ready for a short review because there really isn't much I have to say about this one. This was a perfectly entertaining Western flick, but it isn't anything that I'll see again. The best part of the film is how the two main characters interact. The performances are both great, with Glenn Ford giving the best performance. They could have taken the easy way out and made him a basic bad guy, but they did more than that. There's kind of a yin and yang thing going on, and the dynamic they have on screen is very watchable. There are a couple of scenes that have more tension just because of this dynamic. The story is entertaining and inoffensive, the film is well shot, and the music was decent. I really like the costumes, and the other actors they chose to be the gunslingers fit their roles very well. The film does contain the typical Western cliches. None of the characters aside from the two main ones are particularly well written. There are a handful of cheesy moments, and it doesn't help that the music can get pretty overbearing. There's a bit of stagnation in the transfer from the second act to the third act. There's also a scene where the wife of one of the main characters has a section dedicated to her that actively slowed the film almost to a halt. Luckily, the third act really delivered an entertainment. This film is just perfectly middle of the road to me. It's a fun Western, and I'm glad I saw it, but I most likely will never see this again. Who knows, maybe I'll watch the remake sometime, but not anytime soon. Another 6, who'd have thought? This was probably the most grounded and brutally realistic film I saw in Part 3. The story is incredibly captivating. I love how the director approached the storytelling in a documentary style. Even though the story itself isn't true, the events it's based on are. If I didn't know this, I'd probably be sold on the thought that it could be a documentary. There's a handful of intense and disturbing scenes, most of which involve the aftermath of torture. There's a scene involving 3 women that was particularly nail-biting. There were multiple scenes of bombings and shootings that were genuinely difficult to watch. This film is known to have influenced and motivated groups like the Black Panthers and the IRA. It was actually shown to some government officials in the Pentagon. What I'm trying to say in my own over-explainy way is that the impact this film had on not only cinema, but real political and revolutionary history is completely undeniable. Even though its impact is the most interesting thing about it, there is some genuinely purposeful filmmaking at play here. As I said earlier, the documentary approach is incredibly effective. The music was probably my favorite aspect of the film. The score here was done by the legendary Ennio Morricone, who even used a track from this film in Inglourious Basterds later in his career. I do have issues with this film, mainly having to do with personal gripes that others may not have. I know that it's just the way Italian films were made back then, but the copious amounts of dubbing and ADR were incredibly distracting. Normally it doesn't completely bother me, but the fact that the audio much of the time did not even closely match with the lip movements is just too much to ignore. This was even more apparent when the audio and lip syncing for the French audio was perfectly fine most of the time. There's also a solid 15 minutes that I felt could have been trimmed. The choice of there being a main character did not work for me all that well, mainly because he was only focused on in the first 20 minutes, the final 10 minutes, and a couple of select scenes in between. My respect for this film is immense, and I'm so glad that it was made. It is a film where the impact was a little more interesting than the film itself, but the film is well worth the watch. It might grow on me, so the rating here is a little loose, but solid 7. This is the third film I've seen from Soviet-era filmmaker Mikhail Kalatozov, the first being I Am Cuba and later The Cranes Are Flying, both of which are pretty great films. I Am Cuba especially is one of my favorites, and I personally believe that is his masterpiece. I love his visual style and his sense for cinematography. He's a director that prioritizes the long takes of his films, and most of the time they're incredible. The visuals of this film are genuinely breathtaking at times, and the long takes are fantastic. There are a couple in particular that looked as if they took tons of time in planning, and if they screwed it up, it would take tons of time just to set it up again. While I was watching, I was reminded of movies like The Revenant. Oh, and apparently this film inspired The Last Jedi. Well, obviously. This film is certainly entertaining and I was never bored. The film is genuinely fantastic on a technical level, but sadly, I just wasn't wowed on any other level. The characters of the film are kind of where the film suffers for me. The film really doesn't do much to flesh them out. Two characters are in a relationship and they don't really get much development aside from that. There's a weird love triangle that I didn't really care about. The struggles were there, but my investment in it just wasn't there. It clearly prioritized the visual style rather than the characters. This isn't the first time Kalatozov has done this. I Am Cuba does the same exact thing, but that film doesn't make the characters the main focus, unlike this film. It just felt simpler by comparison, which isn't a bad thing, but it does reduce the power behind it. The characters weren't as great in The Cranes Are Flying, and it just wasn't as polished or emotionally powerful as I Am Cuba. I love the visuals and the filmmaking, but I don't think this is a fantastic film. Another 7. This is the second film in the Apu trilogy. I saw the first one, Pather Panchali, a while back and absolutely loved it. I went on to buy the Apu trilogy on Criterion Blu-ray. I personally do not think this film is as great as Pather Panchali, but I still loved it. I do love that this film takes a more direct approach to developing the character of Apu. The first film focused more on the family as a whole and what they went through. Apu in this film goes through more and evolves in a very natural way. He's genuinely compelling, and the scenes where he's on his own in the second half are pretty fantastic. They also gave more time for his mother. You understood more of her fears and desires. Her relationship with Apu feels incredibly genuine. She can be manipulative, but she does it out of her fear of loneliness, which makes her more compelling. Character development was actually one of the weaker parts of the first film, and here they did a much better job with it. This film is very well made, especially considering the infamous restoration process. The cinematography was great, and I loved the music. I also found that the casting of the different actors to play Apu is pretty great. They definitely put forth real effort to get the mannerisms down. The performances themselves are fantastic, with the mother being particularly amazing. The story is also great and no time feels wasted. The writing really does a fantastic job at selling the emotional heart, and the final 25 minutes were incredibly effective. Apparently the film has parts in it that are semi-biographical of the director himself. I know I've spent the last little bit loving this film, but there are issues I have with it. Most of my issues are based in the structure. It's kind of clunky and choppy choppy, and it does feel a bit too stretched to feel like a consistently flowing narrative, especially since the director took more of a chapter-based way of telling the story. It felt that some scenes didn't flow very well into the next, which is something that the previous film did a lot better. I have my issues with this film, but it still felt like a genuine continuation of a great story. I felt more connected to Apu and his mother, and this only makes me feel even more excited than I already was for the final film in the trilogy, Apur Sansar, which I actually will be checking out in part 4. This one gets a strong 7! What a fucking change! I haven't seen any films in the Eclipse series, but they kinda fascinate me. They're filled to the brim with films that feel obscure, even to those who are lovers of the Criterion collection. So I kinda just chose the one that looked the most interesting to me, even though I didn't look for long. I do love the film's production, the sets are pretty great, and the costumes feel genuine. I love how grimy the film is, which is kinda hard to find in many recent war films. The performances of the film were decent, but nothing noteworthy. I didn't find any of the characters to be particularly great. I do recall a few emotionally impactful moments, but I don't remember them specifically. I do like the filmmaking at play, but nothing aside from the atmosphere was really exceptional. As much as I love the atmosphere, it doesn't hold a candle to something like Paths of Glory, which honestly blows other World War I films out of the water. This film just didn't really hit me all that hard. I kinda watched it, liked it in the moment, and now I don't really remember much about it. I've seen what this film is doing done better in other war films. I'm glad the film was effective, and I really do appreciate it. It clearly laid the groundwork that led to the creation of truly fantastic war films. I just don't think that this is one of those fantastic war films. 6 out of 10! Alright, strap in, because I got a lot to say about this one. Before checking this out, I decided to watch the first films in the Hulot quadrilogy, those being Monsieur Hulot's Holiday and Mon Oncle. I personally enjoyed them a ton, but I especially loved Mon Oncle. But this is absolutely director Jacques Tati's magnum opus. His comedic style feels very reminiscent of films from Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin. Tati plays a character who's dropped into an unfamiliar world that they don't understand, and their interaction with said world is where the meat of the comedy comes from. I love this style, and Tati knocked it out of the park with his particular and immaculate spin on it. He creates such beautiful and vibrant worlds that I genuinely want to experience myself, while also implementing compelling commentary in each of his films. Holiday deconstructs the obliviousness that comes with being on vacation, Mon Oncle commentates on suburbia and neighborhood social hierarchy, and Playtime takes on consumerism and urban modernism. The production design of Playtime is some of the best I've ever seen. Tati built the sets of this small town, which takes genuine vision. Each sequence has a different set that incorporates its own background jokes and personality. There are no two sets that look the same, and the overly modernistic take on Paris leaves a ton to chew on in terms of visuals. This also comes from the incredible atmosphere. The cinematography was amazing, and what makes it amazing to me is that the shots are placed at a distance and the takes are long, which allows the comedy to naturally evolve. Sometimes entire minutes are dedicated to jokes, and it's genuinely fantastic, which is elevated by the plethora of background jokes. Tati's films are mostly plotless and have a very loose structure because the character Tati plays is the primary focus. We're new to these environments just like him, and we learn about said environments through him. Tati's character also has a ton of entertaining and interesting quirks that make him instantly recognizable. His physical acting is on par with the likes of Charlie Chaplin. This film is ahead of its time and incredibly insightful. It was beautiful, chaotic, original, and even kind of stupid at points, but they all play out in service to the comedy and the endearment of the main character. It's all part of the fun with Tati, and I genuinely find myself in awe of what he's able to create. I've seen this film twice now, and it has not only become one of my favorite comedies ever made, but one of my favorite all-time films. 10. No question. 10. 10, no question. Just 10. This is the first film I've seen that John Cassavetes has directed. I love the movies he stars in, but this is one where he had complete control. To be honest, I don't think this was a good place to start. I liked it, but I'm kinda divided on it too. I appreciated the filmmaking as a whole. There were a handful of great shots, but there were also some kinda crappy shots. I loved the oneers that properly brought out the ability in these actors. All of their performances are fantastic. Ben Gazzara was probably my favorite out of the three. The dynamic between Falk and Cassavetes was entertaining, but it was honestly better in Mikey and Nikki. I think the improvisation of the actors helped me feel the authenticity between the characters, and according to Cassavetes, they were essentially playing versions of themselves. I liked the writing of the characters, but I honestly took issue with it sometimes. I get that they're all going through a midlife crisis, but they were total assholes. I get the angle that they were going for, there just came points where I just wanted to kick them in the jaw. I'm just gonna chalk it up to personal preference, because there is a purpose to it. I do think it serves the uncomfortable tone the film is going for. This did make for a great ending though, which honestly made the harsher scenes feel more purposeful other than just an excuse for them to belittle women. I enjoyed this film as a whole, but I should have picked a different one. Maybe Gloria or Love Streams. I'm definitely looking forward to his other films, and who knows, maybe those will grow on me over time. I don't know. Seven! Hello, this is not the outro that I originally recorded for the video that you're currently watching. And the reason why is because my voice decided to give out. And I kind of had to deal with that. Because I still wanted to make this video and get it released within the week, because I haven't made a video like this in a very long time. But my voice was just like, nah, we're just gonna make it harder for you. Yeah. So that's kind of why I had a bit of a drop in voice quality in the middle of the video. You may hear that, like, I guess like around halfway through, I guess my voice sounds kind of tired. And that's why I literally, like, it gave out in the middle of recording one of the sections, and then all of a sudden my voice was very scratchy and definitely not in shape. So I decided to take a day, let my voice heal a little bit, and that helped. But I still wanted to release this video. So I thought, hey, yeah, I'll figure it out. And I did. I don't think it sounds terrible. I'm not done with the video right now as I'm recording this, but I mean, I looked at it and I think it looks fine or sounds fine. Um, yeah, so I apologize for that. Now I'm not gonna cut to the original outro because I kind of just did nothing during that outro and made a very shitty joke. That doesn't make sense because that's my kind of humor. Anyway, my next video will most likely be the 2020 list, Best of 2020, which I have been putting off for a very long time because making that video genuinely burnt me out, and I had to take a break from even making videos in order to, well, not feel like shit all the time. I don't want to get into it, it's kind of personal, but basically the story goes, I was making the video and I eventually had a pretty bad panic attack, I think. And it did not help that, well, I was basically pursuing my hobby and working myself in a way that didn't feel fun. Making videos wasn't really enjoyable. Making the video wasn't really enjoyable. I was kind of just watching movies because of some obligation rather than because I genuinely wanted to. So I took a while to let myself watch movies because I want to watch movies, and that's what I did. And now, from now on, I'm gonna start doing this thing where I take a couple weeks from making videos every once in a little while so I can just watch some movies that I want to watch instead of only watching movies out of pure obligation, because that's fucking stupid, because it definitely did not help. Anyway, I want to be at 100% when making videos, and also I have people in my life that I care about and want to be 100% for, and I don't want to be plagued by anxiety or stress or too much stress. So yeah, that's kind of my solution for that. That's all I have to say about why I was gone. That's a very That's really all I have. There's nothing special. Nothing huge happened. I just needed time off. And now I'm here making this video, and this intro is running for a very long time, and I should probably stop and just get back to actually finishing making this video. So yeah, you can hear it in my voice. I sound really fucking tired, and that's because I kind of am. But making this video has actually been kind of fun. I liked watching the movies for the video, and I've just been watching movies that I want to watch, and that's been genuinely really fucking fun. I've discovered new favorites. I've discovered new movies that I don't really give a shit about. I've discovered some bad movies. That's typically how the bullshit goes. I don't have much else to say. I think that's it. Thank you very much for watching. I'll be back in my regular location someday soon. I don't know if I'll be there before or after I start recording the 2020 list. I think I'm going to be here for just a little while longer, so I think I'm going to try and record as much as I can here. Maybe even enough to like finish recording. Like maybe do all the recording here and then edit once I get back home. That was actually the original plan. Period. So that might be the case. That might be what I'm doing. Anyway, thank you very much for tuning in. And stay frosty.